The sky above the sprawling estate of the Thorne family didn't just turn dark. It bled. This was the night of the crimson moon, a celestial anomaly that occurred once every 100 years, and for Clara Lannister, it was supposed to be the night her fate was sealed in stone and cold tradition. The air was thick, metallic, smelling of ozone and crushed jasmine, pressing against her lungs as she stood on the marble balcony. Her breath hitched, catching in a throat constricted by a corset that felt more like armor than silk. Below her, the gardens were a labyrinth of shadows and ruby-tinted light, but the real danger wasn't in the dark. It was in the bloodline she carried and the duty that demanded she marry a man who looked at her like a piece of ancestral property. Welcome everyone to the channel. I'm so glad you've joined us for this journey tonight. Before we descend further into the secrets of the Crimson Night, I have to ask, where in this wide world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I love seeing how far our stories travel. How are you all doing today? If this story already has your heart racing, please take a second to hit that subscribe button and join our community. Your support is the heartbeat of these tales, and we have so much more to uncover together. Clara's fingers white-knuckled the stone railing. She wasn't just afraid, she was suffocating. Tonight she was to be pledged to the High Guard, a union that would solidify her family's power but extinguish the last flicker of her soul. The ancient rules of her world were absolute. Purity of lineage, absolute obedience, and a total ban on any contact with the outcasts, those marked by the old power, the ones her people had hunted into the fringes of the wasteland. Her skin itched with a restlessness she couldn't explain, an invisible tether pulling her gaze away from the glittering ballroom and toward the forbidden tree line of the Whispering Woods. Suddenly, a sound shattered the silence of her internal panic. A low, rhythmic thrumming like a heartbeat vibrating through the very earth. It wasn't coming from the party. It was coming from him. He stood at the edge of the torchlight, a silhouette draped in the crimson glow. Jack Coventry. He shouldn't have been there. No outcast would dare breach the Thorne perimeter, especially not on a night when the veil was thin. But there he was, his presence a violent tear in the fabric of her structured reality. His eyes, even from the distance, seemed to catch the moonlight, glowing with a fierce, forbidden energy that made the mark on his forearm pulse with a dull, golden light. Claire knew the stories. They were monsters. They were chaos. They were the reason her world had walls. But as their eyes locked across the distance of 1,000 years of hatred, she didn't feel fear. She felt a recognition so sharp it was agonizing. It was as if a mirror had been held up to her own hidden rebellion. "Who are you?" she whispered, the words lost to the wind, yet he tilted his head as if he'd heard her perfectly. He didn't move, didn't flee. Instead he raised a hand and the shadows around him seemed to dance, defying every law of physics her tutors had ever beaten into her. In that moment the first seed of a terrifying mystery took root. Why did the air between them hum with a frequency that felt like home? Why did her own blood seem to answer the call of his mark? The heavy oak doors behind her creaked open. Her father's voice, cold and commanding, called her name, summoning her to the altar of her own sacrifice. Clara looked back at the ballroom, a gilded cage of lies, and then back to the man in the woods. The choice was a razor's edge. If she stayed, she lived a lie. If she moved toward him, she invited a war that had been brewing for centuries. As the crimson moon reached its zenith, the light turned a blinding, violent scarlet. In that heartbeat, Clara realized the most terrifying truth of all. She wasn't being hunted by the man in the shadows. She was being summoned by a fate that had been written before the world was broken. What happens when the person you've been taught to hate is the only person who can make you feel alive? Does she step into the dark, or let the golden cage lock forever? The heavy oak doors groaned as they swung open, the sound echoing like a death knell against the vaulted ceilings of the Thorne Manor. Clara turned, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her father, Arthur Lannister, stood framed in the light, his silhouette sharp and unyielding. To the world, he was the pillar of order. To Clara, he was the architect of her suffocation. He didn't see a daughter, he saw a legacy to be traded. Beside him stood the man who was to be her tether. Victor Coventry, a high-ranking commander of the city's elite guard. Victor was handsome in a way that felt like polished marble. Cold, perfect, and entirely devoid of life. "Clara," Arthur's voice was a low rumble layered with a warning she knew all too well. "The council is waiting." The crimson moon is at its peak. The binding ceremony must begin. Clara looked back at the gardens, but the shadow, the man with the glowing mark, was gone. Only the red moonlight remained, staining the white roses like blood. She felt a hollow ache in her chest, a yearning for a freedom she had never actually known. Her deepest fear wasn't death, it was this. A life where every word was scripted, every touch was a transaction, and her own magic, the strange flickering warmth that sometimes sparked at her fingertips, had to be buried under layers of ironclad suppression. As she was led toward the great hall, she passed her younger sister, Elara Lannister. Elara was the only person who knew Clara's secret, that Clara often slipped away to the forbidden library to read texts about the marked ones. Elara caught her eye, a flicker of genuine terror passing between them. Elara whispered, barely audible, "Don't let them extinguish it, Clara. Don't let them take the fire." The great hall was a sea of masks and silver embroidery. The Thorne family prided themselves on their purity, a term that meant they had successfully scrubbed any trace of the old world's chaotic power from their veins. But as Clara took her place at the altar, she felt a surge of nausea. The air in the room felt stagnant, rotting behind the scent of expensive incense. Victor stepped forward, his hand reaching for hers. His touch was clammy, devoid of the electric hum she had felt just moments ago when Jack had simply looked at her from the woods. "You look radiant, Clara," Victor murmured, though his eyes were scanning the room for potential threats, ever the soldier. "Tonight we ensure the safety of our world. No more chaos. No more outcasts." But Clara's mind was elsewhere. She was remembering the secret she had kept since she was 7 years old. The day she had accidentally healed a dying bird in the garden, its feathers knitting back together under a soft golden glow that shouldn't have existed in a pure thorn. She was an anomaly, a glitch in their perfect system. And as the priest began the ancient incantations, the ground beneath the manor groaned. It wasn't an earthquake. It was a call. Far below the foundations, in the hidden catacombs her family pretended didn't exist, something was waking up in response to the crimson moon. Clara felt a pull in her gut, a magnetic force dragging her consciousness toward the whispering woods. She realized then that Jack Coventry hadn't just been trespassing. He had been waiting. "Do you, Clara Lannister, pledge your essence to the Order?" the priest intoned, his voice echoing. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara looked at her father's expectant face, at Victor's possessive grip, and then at the window where the red moon loomed like a giant, watchful eye. She realized that her motivation wasn't just to escape a marriage. It was to discover why her blood sang a song that her family had spent centuries trying to silence. The intrigue of Jack's presence burned in her mind. Who was he to carry a name like Coventry, the same as her betrothed, yet live as an outcast? What hidden depth lay in the history of these two families that had been rewritten to serve a lie? Clara started, her voice trembling. But before she could finish, the massive stained-glass window at the end of the hall shattered inward. Shards of multicolored glass rained down like lethal confetti, and through the opening, a hawk with feathers the color of midnight and eyes of burning gold soared in, circling the altar. The guests screamed, but Clara stood frozen. She knew that bird. It was the same one she had saved all those years ago. And it was carrying a message tied to its leg with a strip of leather marked with a single glowing rune. The connection was established. The intrigue was now a physical weight in the room. Her life as a puppet was over. The story of the Crimson Night was only just beginning. The great hall erupted into a cacophony of terror. Guards unsheathed silver-plated blades, the metallic shing echoing against the screams of the aristocracy. Victor Coventry didn't reach for Clara to protect her. He reached for his weapon, his face contorting into a mask of cold, calculated aggression. "Outcast interference," he roared, his voice cutting through the panic. "Secure the perimeter. Kill the beast." But Clara didn't see a beast. She saw a lifeline. As the hawk circled, the air in the room shifted, growing heavy and charged with static. The bird dove not toward the guards but directly at Clara. She didn't flinch. As its talons brushed her shoulder, a piece of parchment fell into her palm. It felt hot, vibrating with a pulse that matched her own. "Clara, move away from it," her father screamed, his face purple with rage and fear. "It's a curse. Drop it." She didn't drop it. Instead, her thumb brushed the glowing rune on the leather strap. The world didn't just change, It inverted. A localized shockwave of crimson energy exploded from the parchment, throwing the guards backward and shattering the heavy chandeliers. The great hall plunged into a flickering ruby-tinted darkness. In the chaos, a shadow detached itself from the broken window. He didn't land like a man, he landed like a predator. Jack Coventry, the man from the woods, stood between Clara and the high altar. Up close he was devastating. His leather armor was scarred, his dark hair wind-blown, and his eyes weren't just gold, they were molten. The air around him seemed to warp, the temperature rising until the silk of Clara's gown felt like it might ignite. "You," Victor hissed, recovering from the blast. He leveled his sword at Jack's throat. "The traitor returns. I should have finished you in the pits, brother." The word brother hit Clara like a physical blow. Her breath caught. The man she was supposed to marry and the man who looked like a storm incarnate were of the same blood? The realization sent a jolt of electricity through her. The history she had been taught, that the outcasts were a separate subhuman species, was a lie. They were kin divided by a choice or perhaps a curse. "You couldn't finish me then, Victor." Jack's voice was like velvet over gravel, deep and dangerous. "And you certainly won't do it on a night when the moon belongs to the marked." Jack turned his head slightly, his gaze locking onto Clara's. In that moment the inciting incident wasn't just the crash or the bird. It was the choice in his eyes. He wasn't there to kidnap her. He was there to offer her a door. "The binding ceremony is a trap, Clara," Jack said, ignoring the swords closing in on him. "They aren't marrying you to a man. They're tethering your light to a machine that will drain you to power their city for another century. Look at the altar. Look at the stones." Clara looked. Underneath the white silk of the ceremonial table, the ancient stones were beginning to glow with a sickly, parasitic green light, reaching out like veins toward where she had been standing. Her father wasn't protecting her, he was harvesting her. "Lies." Arthur Lannister bellowed. "Guards, execute him." "Decide, Clara," Jack said, reaching out a hand. His palm was calloused, his fingers marked with the same golden runes that now began to glow fiercely on his forearm. "Stay and become a battery for a dying world, or come with me and find out why the moon bled for you tonight." The decision was a fracture in her soul. To leave was to become a traitor, to lose her name, her sister, and her safety. To stay was to die while still breathing. Victor lunged, his blade aimed for Jack's heart. In a reflex she didn't know she possessed, Clara's hand shot out. A burst of pure, golden light, the fire Elara had whispered about, erupted from her palm, forming a shimmering shield that sent Victor flying across the marble floor. The room went deathly silent. Her father's face went pale. She had revealed the infection. She was no longer a daughter, she was a target. "Run," Jack commanded. He didn't grab her. He didn't have to. Clara took the first step, then the second, her heavy skirts tearing as she leaped over the fallen debris. They reached the broken window just as the high guard swarmed the hall. With the red moon as their only witness, they plunged into the darkness of the Whispering Woods, leaving the world of order behind. The forest didn't just swallow them, it breathed. Every step Clara took into the Whispering Woods felt like a violation of 1,000 years of ancestral fear. Behind them, the sounds of the estate, the rhythmic clanging of armor, the baying of hounds, and her father's distant, distorted bellows, faded into a suffocating silence. The trees here were ancient, their bark shimmering with a faint, bioluminescent moss that pulsed in time with the thrumming in Clara's own veins. "Keep moving," Jack hissed, his voice low and jagged. He didn't look back, his movements fluid and silent, like a shadow reclaiming its territory. "The High Guard won't stop at the tree line tonight. Not for you. Not for what you just showed them." Clara tripped over a protruding root, the heavy silk of her wedding gown snagging on a thorn bush. She ripped the fabric away with a desperate sob, the sound echoing too loudly in the stillness. "What did I do, Jack? That light. That wasn't me. It couldn't have been." Jack stopped abruptly and turned. In the filtered crimson moonlight, his face was a map of scars and intensity. He reached out, his fingers hovering just inches from her skin, and for a second the air between them crackled. "That light is exactly who you are, Clara. It's why they kept you in that gilded cage. You're not a pure thorn. You're the source. And Victor, he isn't just your betrothed. He's the siphon." The revelation felt like a physical weight pressing the air from her lungs. A siphon. A man designed to bleed her dry to keep a dying city running. The tension between her old life and this terrifying new reality tightened like a noose. "My father knew," she whispered, the betrayal tasting like ash. "Your father orchestrated it," Jack replied, his jaw tightening. "But we don't have time for the morning of lies. We have 3 miles of living woods to cross before dawn, and the woods don't like strangers." As they pushed deeper, the atmosphere shifted. The trees seemed to lean in, their branches clicking together like skeletal fingers. This was the rising tension of the wild, a place where the rules of the city didn't apply. Every rustle in the undergrowth felt like a predator. Every shift in the wind sounded like a whisper of her name. Jack began to lead her through a series of narrow ravines, his hand finally closing around hers to guide her. The moment their skin met, a jolt of pure, unadulterated energy surged through Clara. It wasn't the cold, clinical touch of Victor. It was a wildfire. Images flashed behind her eyes, burning stars, ancient battles, and a woman who looked exactly like her standing atop a mountain of glass. "You feel it, don't you?" Jack murmured, his pace slowing just enough for their shoulders to brush. The proximity was dangerous. He was an outcast, a man her people had branded a monster, yet his touch felt like the only thing keeping her tethered to the earth. "I feel everything," Clara admitted, her voice trembling. "I feel the trees. I feel the moon. I feel you." A flicker of something vulnerable crossed Jack's face, a momentary break in his hardened exterior, before he masked it with a grimace. "Don't. Attachment is a luxury the marked can't afford. Victor is trailing us with seekers, mechanical hounds tuned to your specific frequency. If we linger, they'll find us by the scent of your fear." To complicate matters, a thick, unnatural mist began to roll off the forest floor, a red-tinged fog that obscured their path. It was a false trail, a defense mechanism of the woods. Clara saw figures in the mist, her sister Alara crying out for help, her father holding out a hand in feigned forgiveness. "Don't look at them," Jack shouted, grabbing her shoulders and spinning her toward him. "It's a red herring of the mind. The woods eat what they can confuse. Look at me. Only at me." Clara locked her eyes onto his molten gold gaze. The world around them vanished into a blur of gray and red, leaving only the two of them in a pocket of desperate intimacy. Her breath hitched. The attraction was no longer a pull, it was a collision. In the face of certain capture or death, the pretense of being enemies was crumbling. "Why did you come for me?" she asked, her voice a ragged plea. "You could have stayed hidden. Why risk your life for a thorn?" Jack's grip on her shoulders tightened, his thumbs brushing the collarbone where her source pulse beat frantically. "Because 100 years ago our families weren't rivals, Clara. They were two halves of a whole. And because I've been watching you from the shadows since the day you healed that bird. I couldn't let them kill the only light left in this world." A distance away, a metallic howl ripped through the trees. The seekers were close. The obstacles were mounting, the romance was igniting in the middle of a literal hunt, and the growth Clara felt wasn't just magical. It was the terrifying realization that she was falling for the one man who could destroy her. The metallic howls of the seekers grew deafening, a jagged mechanical sound that tore through the ancient harmony of the whispering woods. Jack pulled Clara behind the massive twisted roots of a silverbark tree, his body shielding hers. The red mist was thick now, smelling of ozone and wet earth. "We can't outrun them on foot anymore," Jack whispered, his breath hot against her temple. His hand moved to the mark on his arm, which was now pulsing with a violent, rhythmic gold light. "They've tuned the hounds to your biological signature, Clara. As long as your source is active, you're a lighthouse in the dark for Victor." Clara's heart hammered. "Then teach me how to turn it off. Hide me." Jack looked at her, and for the first time she saw a flicker of genuine hesitation in his molten eyes. "I can't teach you to hide what you are, Clara. Because you don't even know what you are." Before she could question him, the mist parted. But it wasn't a seeker that stepped through. It was a projection. A shimmering, blue-tinged holographic image emitted from a mechanical disc hovering in the air. It was Victor's face, cold and triumphant. "Clara." The projection spoke, its voice distorted by the forest's interference. "Stop running. You're endangering yourself with a murderer." Do you really think Jack came for you out of love? Out of some noble fate? Jack lunged to swat the disc away, but Victor's laugh echoed through the trees. Tell her, Jack. Tell her about the covenant of the Crimson Knight. Tell her why an outcast needs a thorn source to break the curse on his own blood. Clara froze. She looked at Jack, who had gone deathly still. The golden glow of his mark seemed to stutter. Jack? What is he talking about? He's using you, Clara. Victor's projection sneered. The outcasts aren't just marked by power, they are dying from it. The golden energy in their veins is a slow-acting poison. The only way to stabilize it, the only way for Jack to survive another year, is to tether himself to a source. He didn't rescue you from a cage, he stole you for his own survival. The world felt like it was tilting on its axis. Everything Clara believed, her budding trust in Jack, the idea that he was her protector, shattered like the stained glass in the Great Hall. Was she just moving from one siphon to another? From a father who wanted her power for his city to a rebel who wanted her power for his life? Is it true? Clara's voice was a ghost of itself. Are you dying? Jack didn't look at the projection. He looked only at her, and the raw vulnerability in his expression was more painful than any lie. The mark is a burden, yes, he said, his voice cracking. And yes, a source can stabilize it. But Clara, I didn't come for that. I came because you needed a battery. Victor interjected. Search his vest, Clara. See the binding stone he carries. It's identical to the one on the altar at the manor. He was going to tether you the moment you reached the outcast camp. Clara reached out, her fingers trembling as she brushed the leather pouch at Jack's waist. Her hand closed around a cold, hard object. He pulled it out. It was a jagged crystal, pulsing with a faint, parasitic green light, the exact same light she had seen beneath the altar. The betrayal was a physical blow to her chest. The romantic connection they had shared moments ago, the shared breath, the electric touch, now felt like a calculated seduction. The stakes hadn't just been raised, they had been set on fire. Clara, listen to me, Jack pleaded, taking a step toward her. The stone, it's not what you think. I took it from the armory to destroy it, not to use it on you. Then why do you still have it? She cried, backing away. Why didn't you tell me you were dying? Because I didn't want you to stay out of pity. Jack roared, his frustration boiling over. And because the truth is worse than Victor knows. He grabbed her hand, and this time he didn't hold back his power. He forced a vision share. Clara's mind was flooded with images not of her own past but of theirs. She saw the two families, Lannister and Coventry, standing together centuries ago. She saw that they weren't just two halves, they were the same bloodline. The outcasts weren't a different race. They were the firstborn sons and daughters who manifested the power, while the pure were those who were born without it and grew jealous. The curse wasn't a biological defect. It was a spell cast by the first Thorn Patriarch to divide the family and consolidate power. And the only way to break the spell wasn't to siphon a source. It was for a source and a marked one to willingly share their essence in a bond of total equality. The midpoint revelation hit her with the force of a tidal wave. Victor and her father were keeping the world in a state of perpetual war and energy scarcity to maintain control. Jack wasn't her captor, and he wasn't just her protector. He was the other half of a broken key. The moon is turning dark, Clara, Jack whispered, the red light above them beginning to fade into a terrifying, pitch-black eclipse. When the crimson moon goes dark, the veil doesn't just thin, it vanishes. If we don't complete the bond now, of our own free will, the shadows will take us both. Suddenly, a mechanical claw burst through the brush, pinning Jack to the silverbark tree. Victor stepped out of the shadows, no longer a projection. He held a high-frequency pulse rifle aimed directly at Jack's head. The talk is over, Victor said, his eyes cold. Clara, step away from the monster. Come home and fulfill your duty or watch him burn. The determination in Clara's soul ignited. She looked at the binding stone in her hand, then at Jack's suffering face, then at the man who represented her golden cage. She realized she didn't want to be protected, and she didn't want to be a battery. She wanted to be the storm. The mechanical claw hissed, its hydraulic teeth sinking deeper into the silverbark tree, pinning Jack's shoulders against the glowing trunk. He let out a strangled groan, his boots scuffing uselessly against the moss as Victor stepped fully into the clearing. Behind Victor, 4 seekers, Sleek metallic hounds with eyes like glowing infrared slits, fanned out, their low-frequency growls vibrating in Clara's very marrow. "I gave you every chance, Clara," Victor said, his voice devoid of the polished charm he wore in the Great Hall. He adjusted the dial on his pulse rifle. The weapon hummed with a lethal blue light. "I offered you a seat at the head of the new order. Instead you chose a dying relic of a failed bloodline. He's your brother, Victor." Clara screamed, her voice cracking as she watched Jack's golden mark begin to flicker and gray. The poison Victor had spoken of was accelerating. Without the moon's red light to sustain the atmosphere, the energy in Jack's veins was turning on him. Victor didn't even flinch. "He's a defect. A biological error. And you're a resource that's currently leaking." He gestured to the Seekers. "Subdue her. Do not damage the heart. We need the pulse steady for the extraction." The hounds lunged. Clara tried to summon the golden fire that had protected her before, but the fear was a cold shroud, dampening her spark. She felt a sharp electric sting as one of the Seeker's proximity fields brushed her arm. She fell to her knees, the damp earth soaking into her torn silk skirts. "Stop!" Jack roared, his eyes flashing with a desperate, dying light. "Victor, take me. Use the binding stone on me, let her go. She doesn't know how to control the source yet. You'll burn her out in an hour if you force the tether." "That's a risk the Council is willing to take," Victor replied coldly. He stepped over to Clara, grabbing her by the hair and forcing her to look at Jack's agonizing struggle. "Watch, Clara. Watch what happens to those who choose fate over order." He pressed a button on his gauntlet. The mechanical claw didn't just hold Jack. It began to emit a high-frequency vibration designed to shatter the marked molecular structure. Jack's scream was a sound of pure, unadulterated torture that tore through Clara's soul. She watched as the golden light began to leak out of his pores, dissipating into the dark air like dying embers. "No, Jack." Clara scrambled toward him, but a Seeker pinned her down, its metallic weight crushing her lungs. She was separated from him by only a few feet, yet it felt like a canyon. She watched the man who had risked everything for her begin to fade. His skin went pale, his eyes losing their molten luster, turning to a dull, flat gray. The situation was hopeless. Her father had betrayed her, her betrothed was a monster, and the only person who saw her as a human being was being erased before her eyes. The crimson moon was now completely eclipsed, a black hole in the sky that seemed to suck the very hope out of the woods. "It's over, Clara," Victor whispered, leaning down, his breath smelling of sterile chemicals. "The crimson night was a fairy tale. This is the reality. You are a battery and I am the master of the switch." He pulled a second binding stone from his pocket, this one jet black and jagged. As he moved to press it against Clara's throat to begin the force siphon, she looked at Jack one last time. He wasn't looking at Victor. He was looking at her, his lips moving silently, forming a single word. "Goose." In that moment of total despair, Clara felt the coldness of the Seeker above her and the coldness of Victor's stone. She realized that they were all fighting over her because they were afraid. They were afraid of the very thing she was suppressing. She wasn't a battery. She wasn't a resource. But as the black stone touched her skin, a searing pain shot through her entire nervous system. The world went white. The connection was being forced, her essence being ripped away toward the city's hungry machines. She felt her consciousness fraying, her memories of the bird, the woods, and Jack's touch dissolving into a void of static. She was losing him. She was losing herself. And as the darkness of the eclipse settled over the whispering woods, it felt like the light of the world was going out forever. The void was cold, a swirling vortex of static and silence that threatened to swallow Clara whole. As the black stone pressed against her skin, she felt the life force being yanked from her core, funneled into the hungry, mechanical void of Victor's ambition. But in that absolute darkness, a spark remained, not a flicker of the source they wanted to steal, but a memory. She saw the bird she had healed as a child. She felt the warmth of Jack's calloused hand. She realized then that they were trying to take what didn't belong to them because they could only take by force. Jack had asked her to choose. "No," Clara whispered, the word vibrating through the static. The pain didn't vanish, but it transformed. It shifted from a violation to a furnace. Inside the deepest chambers of her soul, the source didn't just resist. It roared. It wasn't a battery to be drained. It was a sun waiting to be born. She understood the secret of the ancestors now. The power wasn't meant to be siphoned into machines. It was meant to be shared between souls. Victor, she gasped, her eyes snapping open. They weren't their usual soft blue anymore. They were radiating a blinding, solar gold that cut through the eclipse like a physical blade. You cannot take what is freely given to another. With a surge of inner strength that shattered the ground beneath her, Clara didn't pull away from the black stone. He pushed into it. She overloaded the connection with the raw, unfiltered essence of her rebellion. The black stone hissed, turning cherry red before exploding into fine, dark dust in Victor's hand. The shockwave sent the seekers tumbling into the underbrush, their internal circuits screaming in protest. Victor was thrown back, his pulse rifle clattering into the mud. Clara stood up, her torn wedding gown billowing in a wind that came from nowhere. She didn't look at Victor. She looked at Jack. He was slumped against the tree, the mechanical claw still draining the last of his grayed-out energy. "Jack," she cried, her voice echoing with a melodic ancient resonance. She lunged toward him, ignoring the searing heat of the mechanical trap. She didn't use a tool, she used her bare hands. As her fingers touched the metal, the gold light from her skin flowed into the iron, softening it like wax. The claw disintegrated. Jack fell into her arms, his body cold, his breath hitching in ragged, shallow bursts. "Clara, stop, it'll kill you." "It won't," she whispered, pulling him close, her forehead resting against his. "Because I'm not holding it back anymore. I'm giving it to you. All of it. Not as a battery, Jack. As a partner." In the heart of the darkened whispering woods, the turning point manifested as a pillar of light that pierced the blacked-out sky. Clara didn't just heal him, she bonded with him. The golden source from her heart flowed into the mark on his arm, and for the first time in 1,000 years, the two halves of the Coventry Lannister bloodline were united by a voluntary act of love. Jack's eyes flew open, the molten gold returning 10 times brighter than before. The gray rot vanished from his skin, replaced by a radiant, healthy glow. He stood up, his hand interlacing with hers, and as they stood together, the mark and the source synchronized. A dome of shimmering energy expanded from them, pushing back the shadows, the mist, and the malice of the old world. The key to the conflict wasn't a weapon or a stone. It was the realization that the curse only existed as long as they remained divided. Victor scrambled to his feet, reaching for a backup sidearm, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. "What have you done? You've destroyed the tether. The city will go dark." "Then let it go dark, Victor," Jack said, his voice now a harmonious blend of power and peace. "It's time for a different kind of light to take over." The seekers, sensing the shift in the food chain, whimpered and retreated into the gloom. The forest itself seemed to bow, the silver-bark trees humming a song of recognition. Clara and Jack stood at the center of the clearing, no longer a fugitive and a thief, but the architects of a new dawn. The final confrontation was set. They had the power, they had the truth, and they had each other. The air in the clearing didn't just vibrate. It hummed with the frequency of 1,000 years of repressed history finally breaking free. Victor scrambled backward, his boots sliding in the mud as he reached for the emergency beacon on his hip. His face was a mask of cold, frantic terror. "You don't understand," he screamed over the rising wind. "The grid, the city's lifeblood, it's tied to the siphon. If you break the connection, you're not just freeing yourselves, you're plunging millions into the dark." "Then let them see the stars for once, Victor," Jack countered, his voice steady and resonant, amplified by the golden tether that now pulsed between his hand and Clara's. But Victor wasn't finished. With a snarl, he slammed the beacon. From the canopy above, a massive black iron containment vessel descended, the Voidlock. It was a weapon of last resort, a vacuum designed to swallow any localized energy source. As it opened, it began to suck the very light from the air, creating a swirling vortex of shadow that threatened to pull Clara and Jack apart. "Stay with me," Clara shouted, her fingers interlacing with Jack's so tightly her knuckles turned white. The Voidlock was a monster of engineering, a physical manifestation of her father's greed. It felt like 1,000 tiny needles piercing her skin, trying to find the source and rip it out. Beside her, Jack's mark flared to a blinding solar white. He wasn't just resisting, he was calculating. Clara, the bird. Jack yelled over the roar of the vacuum. The hawk. It's not just a messenger, it's a conductor. High above, circling the eye of the artificial storm, the midnight black hawk dove. Claire understood. She didn't fight the pull of the void lock, she directed her energy through it. She closed her eyes, reaching out not with her physical hands, but with the fire Elara had promised was her birthright. She visualized the hawk, the trees, and the very blood in Victor's veins. Now! Jack roared. He channeled his marked strength into Clara, acting as a lightning rod. Clara let out a scream that was less a cry of pain and more a battle cry of liberation. A massive, spiraling pillar of golden and crimson energy erupted from their joined hands. It didn't fight the void lock. It fed it until the machine couldn't handle the sheer volume of power. The iron vessel began to glow a dull, heat-treated red. Rivets popped like gunfire. With a final ear-shattering crack, the void lock exploded, sending a wave of pure, revitalizing light washing over the entire Whispering Woods. The Seekers short-circuited instantly, their metallic frames collapsing into harmless heaps of scrap. Victor was thrown against the silverbark tree, the impact knocking him unconscious. The forest went silent, but it wasn't the silence of death, it was the silence of a long-awaited peace. But the satisfying twist was yet to come. As the light settled, Clara felt a shift in the earth. The binding stone, dust on the ground began to swirl, drawn toward the center of the clearing. It didn't form a weapon, it formed a doorway. Through the shimmering haze, Clara saw the great hall of the Thorn estate. But it was different. The guests were gone, and in their place stood the outcasts, hundreds of them, their marks glowing softly, no longer gray or poisoned. Her father, Arthur Lannister, stood at the altar, but he wasn't commanding. He was kneeling. The siphon machine had melted into a pool of useless lead. The tether didn't just break Clara, Jack whispered, his arm wrapping around her waist to support her. It reversed. You didn't just save me. You healed the bloodline. Every marked soul in the city just felt the poison vanish. Clara looked at her hands. They were still glowing, but the heat was gone, replaced by a gentle, sustaining warmth. She looked at Jack, the man who had been her enemy, her captor, and now her soul's anchor. The forbidden love wasn't a crime anymore. It was the foundation of the new world. Justice wasn't found in a courtroom or a battle. It was found in the moment the source and the mark realized they were never meant to be apart. If this climax has you on the edge of your seat, please tell me in the comments. Did you see that reversal coming? And if you haven't yet, join our journey by subscribing. We have one final chapter to write in this crimson night. The first rays of dawn didn't just break the horizon. They arrived as a soft lavender glow that washed away the violent crimsons of the night. The eclipse was over, and with it, the era of shadows that had defined the Thorn and Coventry legacies. In the center of the Whispering Woods, the air was no longer heavy with ozone or the metallic tang of fear. It smelled of damp earth, blooming wild roses, and something new, something that felt like a long-held breath finally being released. Clara leaned into Jack's side, her head resting against his shoulder. Her wedding gown was a tattered ruin of silk and lace, stained with the mud of the forest floor, but she had never felt more like a queen. The source within her wasn't a roaring furnace anymore. It was a steady, rhythmic hum, perfectly synchronized with the pulse of the man holding her. "It's quiet," she whispered, her voice melodic and clear. "I've never heard the woods this quiet." "Because they aren't waiting for a predator anymore," Jack replied, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. His mark was no longer a jagged scar of golden light. It had smoothed into a faint, elegant rune that looked like a permanent part of his skin, a badge of honor rather than a curse. "They're just being." As they walked out of the tree line and back toward the sprawling estate, they didn't find an army waiting for them. They found a world in transition. The high walls of the Thorn perimeter, once reinforced with high-voltage siphon tech, stood dormant. The guards had laid down their pulse rifles, their faces no longer masks of cold duty but expressions of dazed realization. At the edge of the gardens, Elara Lannister was waiting. When she saw Clara, she didn't run to her with a warning. She ran with a sob of pure relief. The sisters collided in a flurry of torn fabric and shared tears. "You did it," Elara whispered into Clara's hair. "The machine stopped, Clara. All of them. For a second I thought the world was ending, but then, I felt it. I felt you. Clara looked over Alara's shoulder to see her father, Arthur Lannister. He looked older, smaller, as if the weight of the lies he had maintained had finally crushed his posture. He didn't reach for his daughter, perhaps knowing he had lost that right, but he bowed his head in a silent acknowledgement of a power he could no longer control. But the most profound change was in the city itself. In the distance, the skyline of the capital began to glow, not with the artificial flickering green of the siphon, but with a warm, steady amber light. The marked ones, once relegated to the fringes and the pits, were walking through the gates. There was no violence, no retribution, only the stunned, silent reunion of families that had been divided for generations. Jack stepped forward, taking Clara's hand once more. The covenant is broken, Clara. Or rather, it's been fulfilled. The two halves of the soul are back where they belong. They stood on the very balcony where Clara had stood only hours before, looking out at a world that was finally breathing. The forbidden love, that was supposed to destroy them both, had instead become the bridge over the abyss. What now? Clara asked, looking up at Jack. Now, Jack said, a slow, genuine smile breaking across his face. The first one Clara had ever seen. We build a world where a source doesn't need a cage and a mark doesn't need a master. We live, Clara. For ourselves. He leaned down, and this time when their lips met, there was no shockwave, no desperate magic, and no fear of capture. It was a kiss of peace, of fulfillment, and of a future that belonged entirely to them. The crimson night had passed, but the light it had ignited would burn for 1,000 years. The journey we've taken tonight is one of breaking chains and finding where we truly belong. I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose between what the world expected and what your heart knew was true? Leave your story in the comments. And if you've enjoyed this 40-minute epic of fate and fire, please subscribe and turn on notifications. We have many more worlds to explore, and I wouldn't want you to miss a single one. Thank you for watching, and remember, even in the darkest night, the light is always waiting for you to choose it.